Hi there, this is Dr. Martin Taylor. I'm a conservation scientist with WWF-Australia, otherwise known as the World Wildlife Fund or the Big Panda. WWF-Australia and throughout the world is really worried about the massive scale of the destruction of wildlife habitat, because that's mostly what's driving our wildlife to extinction. So in this video series, I'm going to show you what we do. And you can do this too. It's all freely available. If you've got a computer, if you've got access to the internet, you can do all the things that I'm going to show you here. And that's all you need, access to the internet. I'm going to introduce you to Google Earth Engine, which allows you to visualize satellite photos of the Earth so you can see the different things, forests and so forth. Then how to use a time slider to look for actual change. Which could be clearing, it could be burning, but clearing becomes pretty obvious after a while. And then we're going to look at the impact on protected species. And then finally we're going to ask the question, is this clearing approved in any way by the Australian government? So let's get into the first slide. In this video, we're going to look at Google Earth Engine, what it does, how to sign up, how to open a workspace, how to go to a location of interest, how to load up satellite photos, because that's really what we're all about, how to interpret the photos, and how to enhance the display. So the first place you go to is something called earthengine.google.com. And if you run down the page, you will see a provision for signing up. So you sign up, you put in your email, your Google email. I've got one here. You say a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, why you want to use Earth Engine, and then you just get access to it. And so when you actually sign in, this is what you'll see. So I've signed into my workspace here. I'm in the workspace. It consists of just a map of the Earth and a couple of buttons, and this is probably the only one we're going to talk about, the Add Data button. Now this is not terribly useful. It's like an atlas map of the Earth. You can zoom in and so forth and move around, or you can look at the satellite imagery for the Earth, and the other thing you can do is turn on and off the labels, the borders, and the place names and so forth. Let's keep it on satellite imagery, but of course this is not very useful for looking at land clearing, is it? We need to get closer in. So let's pick a location of interest. In this case, I'm going to pick a place called Springfield Central, which is west of Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. So let's just go there. And there it is. We've moved into Springfield Central. And let's zoom out just a little tiny bit here and get a handle on where we are and what we're looking at. Let's zoom out a fair way and you'll see here is Brisbane. And when we zoom in, we go to Springfield Central. And I want to just center it on this patch of forest here. And one thing that is good about this is the base Google layer. This is what's called a base layer. So we're looking at the base layer that Google provide. It's all high resolution. You can zoom in and actually go down to individual cars. You can see trees. But the big problem is you don't know when it is. Right? That's the big problem. You don't know how up to date it is. So that's why we have to go to other satellite imagery. And in this case, we're going to add data, and we're going to add Landsat 8, 32-day, top of atmosphere reflectance composite. Now, I'm not going to go into a big explanation of why we use this. This turns out to be the most convenient to use for detecting land clearing. Now, you'll notice that nothing is showing. And that's because the most recent time slice for Landsat, because Landsat satellites are going over every 16 days, so you get a lot of frequent imagery that's available to you. But there's nothing for February and March, so let's go back to January, February and see what we've got. Well, that's not too bad, but let me point out a few limitations, some of which we can fix and some of which we can't. The first is that Landsat imagery has a 25-meter pixel, which is quite big. And so if you go into Springfield, for example, the centre of Springfield, And if we try and zoom in, you can see that in the high resolution imagery that underlies is the base map. You can see individual trees, right? Look at that. I can go right down. I can see people, individual trees, buildings. So that's very fine scale. That's probably about 30 centimeter pixel size, right? Very fine scale. But Landsat is 25 meters. And if you look at that close up, it looks very fuzzy and you can't see what's going on. So Landsat is only good if you zoom out. It's only useful if you zoom out. If you try and zoom in, and even if you zoom out, it's still pretty fuzzy at this scale, right? The further you go out, the better it looks, right? And that's just the reality. Landsat is 25 meters. We have to deal with it. The second problem you notice is all this cloud. Right? That's a real problem. Now, why is there suddenly a line here where there's cloud over here and no cloud? Well, that's not a natural phenomenon. That's because this is what's called a mosaic. It's different images added together. And this is taken at a different time, a time when there wasn't much cloud around. And they're fitted together into a mosaic of different times, right? But the one thing we do know is that that time is sometime in January, February of this year. Here's the time slider to show you that. Now, the final problem is just how dark it is. It's hard to see what's going on there, compared with the satellite imagery, which is much better, it's much brighter. The Landsat imagery is very dark. How do we enhance that so we've got a better idea of what we're looking at? Well, it turns out that all the Landsat satellites have a number of sensors. There's sensors in what we call the visual range of our spectrum, what our eyes can see, but Landsat also has sensors outside our visual range. And a couple of those very useful sensors are called infrared sensors. And so if you just look at red, green and blue that we can see, this is what you get. But we can enhance the image by doing what's called false color. So you give an infrared band, like band 7, and you call that red. And another band that's useful is band 5, and we'll call that green. And band 4, and we'll call that blue. Let's save that and see how different this image looks now. Well, look at that. This is very different, isn't it? We have a much brighter image, much more contrast, and it's easier to see things that are going on. Let's zoom in even a little further here. Okay, so here we see cloud, we see cloud shadow, we see quite clearly that band there which is the power line. And we see this bright green. Well, the bright green is mostly freshly growing vegetation, so usually grass after rain or crops. And then the darker green is the forest, but if you look along the creek here, you'll see there's quite a bit of light green as well, which is indicative of fast-growing vegetation. But the other important colours are these sort of purpley, brown, pink colours. And those are those cleared areas that we can actually see on the satellite image, the high-resolution image. You see that cleared area there? In the Landsat image, that shows up as quite distinct. Similarly, these cleared areas here. But of course, cloud is a headache. We have to kind of work with it. And I'll show you some of the things that we can do to get over that in the next video.